Welcome to Measuring Success Right, the official podcast of the Marriott Student Review, a podcast for students by students, where we connect the leaders of tomorrow with the issues of today.
Hello and welcome to the Measuring Success Right podcast. My name is Frank Turner, and with us today in studio is House of Representative Congressman Blake Moore from the 1st District in Utah. Congressman Blake Moore is a native of Ogden, Utah. Before being elected to Congress, Blake worked for small businesses and in the Foreign Service, experiences that now guide his work on domestic and foreign policy. He has expertise in education, financial services, public policy, healthcare, transportation, supply chain, and waste industries. And this work informs his customer service and problem solver approach in Washington, D.C., as he identifies ways to help the federal government better work for Northern Utah. His passion for helping organizations manage the change process drives his ambition to overcome partisan gridlock, improve federal agencies, and smartly streamline the nation's bureaucracy. Blake obtained a master's in public policy and administration from Northwestern University. He graduated from the University of Utah after serving a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Seoul, South Korea, and signing a scholarship to play as the quarterback at Utah State University. In high school, he was awarded the Wendy's National High School Heisman, an award honoring one male and one female senior for excellence in academics, athletics, and citizenship. Blake is married to Jane Boyer, his amazing, humorous, and very candid wife, who encourages him to take risks and pursue big things. Blake and Jane have 4 awesome and active boys who keep them on their toes: Max, George, Winston, and Franklin. Even after being sworn in, Blake's most prized title is Little League Coach. And on behalf of the Measuring Success Right team, thank you so much for being with us today, Congressman Moore.
No, I'm excited about it, Frank. Love to chat about this. Love to talk to university students. Back to, you mentioned my boys. My youngest, that's almost 1 year old, is also named Franklin officially. So.
Oh, I was definitely going to put a plug in for Franklin right there.
It's a great, strong name. I like it. Sounds almost like Blake. You know?
Couldn't agree. I don't know if you guys did this. My parents named me Franklin to try and keep me humble. I don't know if that's worked with.
Well,
you can tell with the
ironically, we have 4 boys. Max is our oldest, and then it goes George, Winston, and Franklin. And we didn't even plan it, but those are like 3 major prime minister leaders in the nation in Great Britain. I'm sure Max is maybe he'll just be president or something, because we weren't naming our kids after it, but they ended up being, they're strong names. We like it. They're strong names that with a last name like Moore, you have to either do a 2-syllable or a strong K or hard sound like Blake Moore, because it's such a soft last name. But
oh, that's awesome.
Frank's a good one.
Oh, thanks, man. Like I said, I agree. So I guess we'll get to plenty of stuff that you're doing right now in Congress, but a little bit beforehand on your background, what experiences have you had that got you interested in serving in public office?
You know, you just listed off a bunch of my background. Virtually every single one of those things got me interested in this, but I never thought I would do it. I'm one of those individuals that always had it in the back of their heads, like, oh, maybe I'd want to run for a major office one day. But, God, everything has to fall into place. And, there's this, me being one of 4 members of the House of Representatives from the entire state of Utah, like, I don't have the, I'm not necessarily going to be someone there that usually fits a mold. I was interested in it from when I was a kid. My mom worked for the Weber County Clerk's office. I used to go and take ballots and volunteer the night of election night to go help out with whatever they needed to runners and things like that. As a very young age, would hand out flyers and pamphlets for candidates, and then through high school, that Heisman thing that you mentioned, like a really cool award, just because Heisman, college football, all that was a big part of me. But in high school, they do it for, like you said, athletics, academics, but citizenship. So my involvement in the community and working, doing things for nonprofits and all the stuff we do as kids, growing up, either in scouting or church or anything, was all built towards it. So all of this started building, but again, never thought I would do it. Then, I'm in a position where I worked in public policy, intersection of nonprofit, public and private sector work, very applicable to what you do in Congress and consulting, but I also worked for the federal government, like you mentioned, in the intelligence service. So all of these little things happened in my life until it sort of just came down to, there's an open seat. I'm 39 years old, young family, and I went and talked to my boss, who I trust a lot with these kind of, helping me think through things. The guy that founded my consulting firm that I worked for, and he said, Blake, have you and Jane decided whether this is you're talking to me, so I know you're interested, but is this a matter of if or is this a matter of when? And I said, my wife and I sort of had that same conversation. It's a matter, I think it's a matter of when. And he goes, if it's a matter of when, you have to do it now, and I'll be your first contribution. That conversation catapulted me into running for office.
Oh, that's way cool.
Yeah.
And so I guess whenever you got the go-ahead or the affirmation to just strike while the iron's hot, you saw a lot of opportunity in the first district to really try and make some change?
Yeah, I'm from the first district. I grew up in Ogden, graduated Ogden High in 1998. We call ourselves the greats of 98. Anybody that graduated that year, it was a really good year. Just joking. There's plenty of good years.
Well, I was born that year, so
it must be.
right there.
It's applicable. I was born in 1980, which when you're in Korea, they go off of the 12 sun, the zodiacs. And I was the year of the monkey, and everybody made fun of me for that. So it wasn't exactly. I didn't have such good luck. Although I own a Reagan baby, which I do love. I like that you said strike while the iron's hot. There was 12 people in the race. I was one of the last to enter, and I just gave it my all, and I kind of had nothing to lose, and went fast and furious. COVID hit. A bunch of crazy things happened during that election time of spring of 2020. But I think there was a desire for, a younger voice. And while the year I was to turn 40, I wasn't necessarily thinking I was young anymore. But when you run for politics, especially in Utah, I ended up being a younger voice. And people liked that message. There was a lot of, there was some excitement around what we were creating and our voice and our message. And we just kind of slowly chipped away at it. We were in the race of 12 after the convention. That was narrowed down to 4, and emerged from kind of the lowest in the polls to edging out a win. And I'm still trying to build that broad support. And I hope that this general election, people can see that, and they can now look at the work that I've done. With respect to opportunities, things in the first district, you have a lot of support for Hill Air Force Base, but in addition to that, I have tried to create a voice on debt and deficit that isn't about rhetoric, that isn't about, this party versus this party knows everything to fix it, but to contrast the two. There's two different schools of thought with respect to budgeting and spending and taxation, and what's going to be the best thing for our nation. And I think that every single student at BYU should be hyper focused on that, and because you're seeing that our debt is going to become crippling more than it already is, and if we don't move in a different direction, we've got a lot of problems up ahead.
Yeah, well, I know that you stay busy whenever you're in D.C. You're on the House Committee on Armed Services, House Committee on Natural Resources, House Committee on the Budget, which was a recent appointment, if I have that correct. And then on top of that, you have what you just mentioned, the Debt and Deficit Reduction Task Force, which is something is that something that you all started this year?
Yeah, so I just started it because it's a personal passion of mine. And when I ran on a principle of 3 things. I said, 1, I'm going to support Hill Air Force Base. 2, I want to be a part of the reversal of debt culture in Washington. And 3, I want to be a conservative, a positive, optimistic, conservative voice for the next generation. Right? I don't think we have enough of those, and that's why I love opportunities like this to speak to college students and everything. So I put together a task force of about 15 or so really talented, smart people, much more than me, to come together from different industry perspectives: financial services, healthcare, manufacturing, economists, attorneys, and really put together a perspective from Utah's first district and Utah in general about what are some recommendations on how to go about tackling this. Because we're in this situation. I don't care who got us in this situation. We haven't balanced the budget since the late 90s, and we owe it to the American taxpayer to be able to communicate what we're doing and how we need to change this.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a fairy tale for me whenever I hear my parents talk about how the budget used to be balanced back in the late 90s, and it was only like really 20, 25 years ago. And so is the main goal of this task force more educating people like my age who maybe don't know a lot about how debt might work both personally and for Congress, or is there a lot of action that wants to go behind this also?
So the objective is to provide recommendations. Like, that's the only productive way I think I can move forward on these kinds of things. There's actual legislation that we've put in these recommendations, some of which I've sponsored, very few of it which I've sponsored. I've aggregated a bunch of other things that are going on back there and how we move the needle forward. So it's to provide recommendations. It's to establish a framework on how we should be addressing this. And in the byproduct of that, hopefully, is people engaging and understanding what we're in. Like, people don't understand the difference between mandatory and discretionary spending. Look into it, folks. Like, I'm telling you, go and understand how troubling it is that our mandatory spending now takes over 70% of our budget. And that's stuff that we don't even, as members of Congress, really even vote on each year. We ultimately have jurisdiction over it, but it's not stuff that we vote on, so we're not really held accountable to it. And our discretionary budget, keeps getting shrinking. And 50 years ago, it was the opposite was true. Mandatory only covered 30% of our budget, and the 70% of the discretionary you can deal with on an annual basis. But as mandatory continues to grow, it eclipses our ability to actually do some of the other spending measures that become so wrought with politics, when in reality, that's not where our problem is. Our problem is in the autopilot type mandatory spending that never really gets addressed on an annual basis.
Yeah, and the document, or a PDF that I saw that you guys put together, we'll put a link in the bio for it, but it does a great job of outlining a lot of different highlights. It gives kind of like a basis for the issue, and then I think it's...
That's my favorite part, because it tells an objective description of the issue. Then it has a section that says move the needle. Or no, so it says, what's the term we use? It's sort of like aspirational. Like, what is the long-term focus? Where do we need to go in the long term for this? And then there's a section on like moving the needle or near-term recommendations, things that we can implement in the next couple years. And so it breaks it down in communicating it that way.
For me, that was really helpful, because sometimes people can get lost in either a lot of the rhetoric or a lot of the vocabulary that goes into these really complex mechanisms for how budgets get made or spending gets done. But to have it put like this, whenever I was reading it, like reading the mandatory spending had gone from 30 to 70% over the last X amount of years, I thought, well, that's crazy. Like, that's wild to me, And it's
fundamental as to why we're in the situation we're in. But there's always this blame game in Washington when we have let, over the last 50 years, mandatory spending eclipse and not even try to address it, really. And there's been attempts, but really not fundamentally addressing what it is. Like, for example, Social Security. It was designed in the New Deal, FDR era, right? We are a different country now. We have a different life expectancy. We work differently. We have different expectations. And for us to just continue on with a program, because it's largely popular, no one's trying to get rid of Social Security. But if we don't, address how, and reform the process for a lot of our entitlements, healthcare primarily is the big item, like, we're just going to continue to go into more and more debt. So,
especially you're talking about how some of these programs are coming up on almost 100 years and there haven't been a lot of tweaks to them.
Yeah.
It seems like we're really selling our future to really have our today now. I think I heard an analogy that it was like eating seed corn before putting it in the ground. To
selling our future to satisfy the now. That's a great title for today's podcast.
We'll put it right there. So I know you talked about like reducing mandatory spending. What are whenever you come to colleges and talk about the budget task force or other things that you're working on, what are some actions that people can take, whether it's in their local communities or at a state level or at a federal level, to try and like help be involved in this process?
Yeah, so this is for the most part at that level, they need to be aware of it. Congress needs to get its act together, and be aware of what the issue is and why it is the way that it is. Ask your representatives if what they're doing to deal with this and what their ideas are. I've laid out my ideas in an 8-page document. Sometimes that's not. A lot of members of Congress struggle to do that because I can't necessarily control, especially as a freshman in the minority, I cannot control if those recommendations get implemented. All I can do is create and communicate the vision and be held. Now that I've done it, I can be, I can come back in a year and then, continue to communicate, hey, here's an area that we're gaining on. Here's an area that I am finding an enormous amount of gridlock and I'm not able to accomplish anything. But at least I'll be communicating it to my constituents. So as a constituent, just do the opposite and find out what it is that the member of Congress is working on. Let them know you want them to find common ground solutions, because that's the only way to really fix this. The last time we, got into a sound fiscal sense was like the late 90s when you're joking. There was, different parties in control of Congress and the White House, but they worked together. There needs to be more of that, particularly on this issue.
Yeah, it feels like, and what my folks have always told me is that, in years past, both parties would kind of come to the middle to work on things, and then more of the loud or extreme voices on either side of either party would kind of just fall in line. And it seems like today that trend is reversing, where you see both parties kind of move towards extreme measures and almost come like a little schizophrenic or bifurcated. Have you found whenever you have an idea that maybe goes against the direction that the party might be heading, how do you work through finding a solution to a problem whenever you're working on that?
Yeah, you're obviously paying attention, because it is happening the way that you've described it. Look at the defense bill. Defense bill, our military is supported by Republicans and Democrats alike. It's an essential aspect. It needs to be strong. And when that comes to a vote, you have the fringe of the Democrat Party, more very progressive or even socialist, toting Democrat groups. They won't vote for it. They do not vote for military spending. And then you see sort of the hawks on the Republican side, and it's more of in a protest way. They may not like a few provisions in here, so they're going to vote against the whole entire $800 billion bill. To me, we need to be we need to be productive in moving these things forward. They will vote against it. So you have kind of two factions of each party sort of protesting and voting against it, when 70% of Congress comes together and says, no, we're going to support our military. Those that, they kind of joke that they live inside the 40s, if you want to use a football term. That's kind of what your parents were talking about. And a lot of bills still get passed that way. But you are seeing the fringes of the party, the more strident, flame-throwing type of voices, now with the advent and inclusion of social media, they are having an outsized influence on a lot of this, because there's so much media attention that members that are going to work through solutions and find common ground and everything, they get sort of bad-mouthed. Ultimately, I do know that's what the majority of Americans want, because we do have to solve big problems and we have to come together. Why? Because there's a filibuster in the Senate. There's a 60 vote threshold. Anything that needs to get passed has to have, to some degree, large bipartisan support. To get 10 Republicans right now to vote for something, it has to have broad support. So that is still the way we expect legislation to get passed. It's just, to your question though, real quick, I find areas. I'm a freshman in the minority, like I mentioned, but I have passed more bills than any other freshman in the minority into law. And I'm really proud of that, because I've found ways to work together, build relationships, and identify areas that will have broad support. Things like the Medal of Honor Monument Act, things like the Mapland Act, things like better cybercrimes metrics, Afghanistan accountability. I've been successful at being able to find areas that we can drive from our level, and I want to continue to build influence on my committee that I can find that collaborative approach to get things solved.
No, that's awesome. And it seems like a lot of the awareness that you've tried to raise or the work that you've put in during your 2 years as a freshman minority hopefully has the opportunity to come to fruition as, midterms come. And you hear it every cycle, like this election season is the most important election season that we've had. But it really does feel like there's a lot on the line right now.
There is.
To encourage people to go out on November 8th and vote. So that's awesome. I guess just real quick before we let you go, the name of the podcast is Measuring Success Right. And so we love to ask people who come on, how do they measure success? And I'll let you answer it in two parts if you want. One, as a congressman, I know it can be easy for people to think like, oh, success is passing a bill, but we spend a lot of this time talking about how success can maybe be measured in other metrics. And then also just as a person, as Blake Moore, the husband, father of incredibly named children, how do you measure success overall?
I love the question. Thanks, and appreciate you doing this type of podcast. And that's a great name, and I think applicable to what students are going through right now. That you have to, you're always graded on an A, B, C, D. sometimes those things can be a little arbitrary, or whatever it is to get an A. But I encourage people to dig in deeper and find ways to improve themselves along the process. Obviously go for that A, but figure out how to improve how you study. Figure out how to, improve how you do group work, interact with your professors. Those are key. So for me, in the congressional role, there's different aspects of my job. I have fundraising. I have to raise money to be able to be successful in this role. There's things that I can't use any of my budget on the congressional side for anything campaign related, but I have many expenses on the campaign side that I have to do. So I have all the fundraising, and I monitor that, and on a quarterly basis I break it down. That's a very profit and loss type of situation. The way I would measure success is actually proposing legislation that has a chance to be successful, getting involved in things that I believe in, and how much of that we can get advanced. Ultimately isn't my choice, because the majority controls what gets put on the floor, but I do look at it in a simplistic way. I care about legislation that I'm supportive of and seeing it through the finish line. I know legislation that I don't like and that it's going to be bad that I voted against, and that's the majority of what I've done over the last couple of years. And as I look back and I try to think what's been successful, it really has been, one, a culture in our office. Interns love to come to work in our office. That's a big plus for me. And I've got good, strong relationships that I can leverage to move some of this forward if I'm in a different situation after the midterm. So personally, this job has actually made me kind of look to my personal life and be simplify this. Do I have a good relationship with my boys? Am I communicating with Jane? And that's been hard, because it's, I'm pulled in so many different directions. And they're more qualitative type of measurements in my personal life, and I think that's okay. But one thing I do is make sure that my scheduler and we kind of have a threshold of, I need to make sure I'm at least 60% of these Little League games. And if not, we have to change up something of the schedule to make sure I can be there to that. And so we'll have to set those minimum thresholds and get there.
No, that's fantastic. And I know I haven't found a better way to say this to people who serve in public office or who serve in the military, but thank you for your service to our country and what you do. I first had the opportunity to meet you whenever I was on a DC trip for school, and I think it was 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night, and John told us hey, Congressman Moore just shot us a text that said that we could go look at the Capitol. And
that was a fun one. I remember that night.
Dude,
yeah.
It was big time. I don't know how many people have taken selfies in the rotunda at 11:30, but we were having a blast. And just to hear you talk about the work that you did and the work that you do and your family and all of that was just incredible. Friend of the podcast, thank you so much for coming on, Congressman Moore. We really appreciate it.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Make sure you subscribe to our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or SoundCloud so you never miss an episode. Be a friend and tell a friend about measuring success right.
This podcast is a project of the Marriott Student Review at Brigham Young University. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Marriott Student Review or online at marriottstudentreview.org.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect official policy or position of Brigham Young University or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.